Chilukik ran his hands over the polished metal of the prototype. It had been put together remarkably fast, only taking a few days to get it working. He picked it up and inspected the bolt carefully. It was heavier than any steam rifle made to date. However, with the new propellant, it didn't require the extremely heavy steam core. The explosive powder from the human weapons was the hardest to recreate out of any other thing in the rifle. Chilukik picked up the magazine that was full of the new ammunition and placed it into the rifle. He racked the bolt back and took aim down the test range. "Careful, sir. They say it's quite loud," Idis warned. Chilukik looked back and smiled. "Thank you, but I'm sure it can't be that bad." He then took aim again. He steadied himself and flicked the safety off. With a slow and controlled pull of the trigger, the rifle spat out a cone of fire and kicked into his shoulder. It was, in fact, loud. Chilukik's right ear rang painfully, but he righted himself for another shot. This time he yanked down on the trigger. Instead of firing a single bullet as intended, the rifle kept shooting. The rifle kicked back so hard it almost sent him to the floor. He just barely was able to ride the gun until the magazine ran out. "By the gods! Sir, are you alright?" Idis shouted. Chilukik found his footing again and lowered the rifle. He looked back, almost chuckling as he spoke. "Quite alright, thank you. I consider this test a great success despite the malfunction. In these dark times, it's the little wins that count." He placed down the rifle carefully and walked to the door. "Idis, tell the engineers that the Concept 1 was a great step in progress, and I am very happy with it." Idis bowed with a grin. "Yes, sir, right away." Chilukik smiled back for a moment before leaving the test range. He palmed his ear, which was still ringing. Perhaps some ear protection would be a wise investment for next time. "Shell, I found some," Kedanta called out from somewhere in the apartment. Sheldanta looked around to see that her brother was no longer in sight. She searched around frantically before spotting a familiar tail sticking out of a cupboard. She grabbed Kedanta by the tail and yanked him out. He yelped and fell back, his face still in a box of Tshirt. Sheldanta looked down at him and crossed her arms. "Are you not going to share any?" Kedanta just shook his head and kept eating anyway. "You know, if you eat too much, you'll be turned into a Tshirt. Then you'll have to eat rocks forever." Her brother pulled his face from the box and looked up at her. He stared at her for a moment, almost concerned. That's not true." Sheldanta smiled and nodded her head, which caused Kedanta to kick her in the shin. "Out, you little... Give me that!" Sheldanta jumped on her brother and grabbed the box. She wrestled it from his grip and then pinned him with one hand. "See? You're just a little rockworm. K the Tshirt." Just when she thought Kedanta was done fighting, he bit her hand, causing her to almost drop the box. He swiped at it, but only managed to tear it open, and the slabs of dry meat fell all over him. "Are you happy now?" Kedanta looked at himself, then back at his sister and nodded. They collected the pieces, putting them back in what remained of the tattered box, and sitting by a window. After their first couple nights in their house, they decided to leave to find somewhere safer. They found an apartment building not too far away that seemed abandoned. The view from their spot was amazing. Sheldanta had never seen the city like this before. The pillars of smoke coming from the battle-ridden city was off-putting, however. "What if Mum comes back and finds that we're not there? She'll be so worried," Kedanta said between chews. Sheldanta put an arm around him and squeezed. "I don't think Mum will be back. Not for some time. It's going to be just you and me until then." "I miss her." "I do too, Kay. I do too." Campus watched over Lotrin as she slept. He had given up his sleeping bag for her and didn't get much sleep as a result. but after what she had been through the previous night, Lord Trim was due for a good night's rest. Campos tucked her in before standing up and walking away quietly. He moved to the dining room where his squad and Hartosh were waiting. "Alright, gentlemen, this is the plan." Campos pulled a map from his pocket and set it on the table. "We should be about here." He pointed a finger to a location several blocks from their original route. "We have two options. One, we go directly east toward friendly lines. The tunnels will be vital to get through without too much resistance from Veek forces fighting in the area. Or two, we cut north and attempt to link up with the adjacent patrol. Might be less to force our way through, but it's also not guaranteed that they'll be there. Either way, we're going to have to cross the front line. Two will just give us a little more ass to do so. Any questions?" Harrison raised his hand, to which Campos nodded. "What about the original mission? Are we just going to scrub that?" Campos pointed to Robinson. "We've already got a wounded Marine and now a civilian. We can barely move effectively, much less fight. The bottom line is that we were likely not going to find them in this area anyway, so I'm abandoning the mission. Our situation is far too precarious." "I think we should go with the second option," Hartosh announced. "The tunnels are very hard to navigate and would make us fight in close quarters with the Veek. Our advantage is range. We shouldn't squander that." "You have a good point," Campos admitted. "Option 2 would also allow us to evade the enemy more effectively in the case of being overwhelmed. I think that may be our best choice." Several members of the squad nodded in agreement. "Alright, this is how we're going to do it. Tyr, Harrison and Bodine, you're with me. We'll scout ahead and clear a path if need be. Everyone else I want in the rear. Only moving up when my group gets the all clear." Campos stood and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Start packing up. We're moving in 30 minutes. He walked back over to where Lord Trim was sleeping as his squad uncovered. He crouched down by her side and reached out to wake her. Just before he did, Hartosh stopped him. "Would you rather me do it?" Campos nodded and stepped back. "Don't let her leave your side. You're the only one she can understand, so she's your responsibility." "I will be dead and gone before another Veek lays a feather on her. You have my most sincere word," Hartosh assured. "I wouldn't expect anything less. Now get her up and ready to move out in 25 minutes. "What do you see?" Campos asked, as he hunched behind Harrison. Tyr slipped back inside, closing the door softly and faced him. "A few Veek flying at rooftop level. Nothing on the ground as far as I can tell. If we don't linger in the streets, then we shouldn't be spotted." Campos moved to a nearby window and peeked out. "Alright. You see that building right across from us? The one with the red double doors?" Campos pointed to the building in question and Tyr nodded. "I want you and Bodine to move up on that. We'll cover you as you cross. When you're there, me and Harrison will join you." Tyr nodded and placed a hand on the door. "Go," Campos ordered. The two burst out the door into a sprint, and they managed to negotiate the gap in a matter of seconds. Once in place, Campos put a hand on Harrison's shoulder. "Our turn. Go." Likewise, the pair shot out into the street. Soon, they were all stacked up on the red doors. Campos tapped on Tyr's shoulder, the signal to breach. As they had trained and rehearsed many times before, they flowed through. Each movement, each look, each step was executed with precision. They were professionals performing a complex dance of lethality. As they moved through dark hallways and rooms, not a sound could be heard, not even their own footsteps. When the firearm reached the other side of the building, Campos spoke into his handheld. "First floor is clear. You're good to bound across." "Roger, moving." After about a minute, the training squad ran into the building. Doc was first through with Robinson dazed and in tow. At least he was on his feet again, Campos thought. Then came Hartosh and Lotterin in his arms, the rest flowing in behind them. Once everyone had regrouped, Campos took his team to the other side of the building to scout their next crossing. He found a low window and peered out as he had done before. The street seemed to be littered with more bodies than they had seen previously, both Vik and Dakar. A massive firefight must have taken place in the days prior. Other than the ones on the ground, no Vik could be seen. A building that looked suitable parallel to theirs sat with a door agape. Campos ducked down and faced his team. "It's clear, there's an open door. That's where you'll be moving to. Same pairs, go when ready." Tyr and Berdine set up on the door for a moment before rushing out. As they did, Campos peeked through the window. They got about halfway when Berdine stopped to pick something off the ground. "Stupid, keep going," Campos grumbled between gritted teeth. Berdine quickly trotted over to the door, as if he had heard him. Campos moved over to Harrison by the door and breathed in. "Let's move." He took the lead as they bounded across, Harrison almost tripping on one of the bodies. When they reached the other side, Campos went to confront Berdine. "What was that about? A Vig could have flown over and spotted you." "I found something important," he defended himself as he reached into a pocket. "You're going to want to take a look at this," he said, as he pulled out a snow-covered notebook. A human notebook. Campos snatched it from Berdine's hand and inspected it carefully. Before he could open it, a clattering sound came from the open door. Without hesitation, the team moved to the sides of the door. A moment later, Tyr flicked on his flashlight and slid into the building. The other three moving in moments later. When they moved into the dark room, they stopped. Standing there, illuminated by flashlights and terrified beyond all belief, was a Dakaran soldier. His black fur around his neck was raised up, and an M4 was clutched in his shaking hands. "What the fuck?" Berdine shouted, as he ripped the rifle from the Dakar's hands. "Where the fuck did you get this?" He held the rifle up to his face. The Dakar only stuttered in response, which seemed to make Berdine even more angry. Campos had to agree. Where did he get that rifle? "I bet this piece of shit looted it off a dead Marine," Berdine said, as he shot the Dakar with a hand. Fen! He sputtered out, and raised his hands in front of himself. "The hell are you saying? Don't speak English? Maybe you should have looked for a dictionary off his rotting corpse instead." Berdine went to shove him again, but Campos stopped him. He stepped between them and looked up at the Dakar. "Shut up." The Dakar did as he was told and seemed to relax a little. Campos held up the notebook and showed it to him. "You recognize this, don't you? I guess you didn't think it was valuable enough to keep, so you threw it out." Campos opened the notebook to the first page. "Let's see if he wrote his name in here. I bet you didn't even care to check before taking..." Campos stopped, as the name fully registered in his mind. Clearly and neatly written in the front cover was the name of someone who he had come to know and befriend. "Property of Sergeant Patrick, Canadian Army." Bewildered, Campos turned to his team. "Get Hartosh over here. I need to ask this Dakar a few questions." Hartosh greeted Campos in less than a minute. He wasn't happy to leave Lortrin with the other humans, but it was too dangerous to separate her from the larger group. He was surprised to see a Dakar soldier being pressed up against a wall by Berdine. The soldier looked at Hartosh, fear in his eyes. You, please help! They're going to kill me!" he cried out. "What are you doing? He's on our side!" Hartosh shouted in English, as he pulled Berdine from him. The Marine picked up a rifle that was leaned against a wall and held it up. "He took this from one of our own, and he saw a notebook from one of the Canadians. He ain't on my side, that's for damn sure." Hartosh sighed. Trying to ignore the outburst, he turned to the soldier. "What is your name?" "Tenshok, half rank, 11th Infantry Reserve," Tenshok said, as he brushed off his chest. Hartosh looked him up and down. He was surprisingly clean for being all alone and behind enemy lines for several days. Not mentioning his acquisition of human gear, This Dakar seemed off. What about the rifle? My friends seem to think that you stole it off one of their dead comrades. Tenshok glanced over to the Marines, then back to Hartosh. I promise you that I have done no such thing. In fact, it was an Isfer that gave it to me. Wait, you mean to tell me that there's other humans around here? The soldier shifted uncomfortably before answering. That and quite a few of our own. We've been held up across the street since the attack. Honestly, it's good to see a few friendly faces, despite the shaky meeting. Hartosh then turned to Campos and spoke in English. He didn't steal the rifle. He says that some humans that he's been with since the attack gave it to him. From the sound of it, that may be the missing envoy we've been looking for. Campos squinted his eyes at Tenshok, something clearly going through his mind. That still doesn't explain the notebook, the owner of which shouldn't have even been in this city. But I digress. There's no reason we shouldn't believe him, and an extra body is always useful. Tell him to take us to the humans he was talking about, then we can decide what to do from there. Hartosh nodded before turning back to Tenshok. You said the group you were with was just across the street? Could you take us there? Of course. He looked over to Badin, who still held the rifle, though I will require that back. Hartosh looked over to the disgruntled Marine, and tilted his head towards Tenshok. With a grunt, he handed the rifle back and the Dakar slung over his shoulder. Shall we get going then? Once they rendezvoused with the others, Tenshok led them across the street to a half-burnt-out building. If the other street was littered with bodies, this one looked like a mass grave. Though here, it was mostly Veek that laid upon the ground, many of their faces twisted into eternal screeches. Tenshok knocked on the door 3 times, each knock being separated equally. After a few moments, the door creaked open, and an old Dakar peeked through. Tenshok, lad. You're back early. What's the matter? We've got visitors. Several Isfer and a couple Dakar. One of the Isfer is injured. The old man opened the door fully, revealing a steam rifle that was clutched in his offhand. Well, hurry in, son, before any of them flyers catch scent. The old man ushered everyone into the dark building. As Hartosh passed, he got a good look at him. The man was no soldier. He wore faded overalls and a stained brown shirt that seemed to have seen years of wear and tear. The man patted Lord Trin on the shoulder as she passed. A slight smile crept across his face. I'm glad we aren't the only ones left in this hellish city. Whatever fire had scorched the outside seemed to have left the inside unscathed. Tenshok led them up a set of stairs and into a central common room, where dim candles lit up the space. Around them, tens of Dakar sat, soldiers and civilians, men and women, young and old, rich and poor. Hartosh wagered that there had to be at least 20, maybe 30 in there, though there was a noticeable lack of humans, other than the ones he had entered with. Doc led Robinson to a somewhat unoccupied corner, and sat him down next to a woman who held her son in her arms. Soon after, a medical soldier that wore a red collar moved over to try and assist. Hartosh himself got several strange looks from many of the resting soldiers. He had forgotten that he was not wearing his uniform in favour of the human one. He realised that he would be the most senior in the room, as no officers were present. Who's in charge here? He asked the room. The medical soldier stood up, a tall lanky man with cream-coloured fur and sunken green eyes. I am, sir. He limped over to Hartosh and met his gaze. I'm half-rank Jacquard, 8th Medical Battalion, or rather, what's left of them. Who may you be? Hartosh stood as tall as he could, though Jacquard still maintained a few inches over him. First Scout Hartosh. My unit arrangement is a bit uncertain, however. Jacquard smiled wide, a strange contrast of joy brought to the tired man's face. First Scout, eh? Well, I'm glad we have you here now, and with a full escort of Isfer too. Have you seen them fight? The ones we have here just about made an entire Veek Legion turn tail. If only their translator didn't bite it, then we could work out some serious strategy. Hartosh raised his eyebrows. Speaking of the humans, are they around? My friends must talk to them. The medic gave a confused look for a moment before realizing something. Oh, the ISPA you mean? They're more than likely on birdwatch if they're not here. He leaned to the side and called towards the door. Shkunrika? Hartosh turned to see the old Dakar make his way up the stairs with surprising speed. What is it, lad? The old man asked, as he made his way over to the pair. Could you go grab the two ISPA? They need it down here. Right away. The old man then turned to a set of stairs and pulled himself up them. Before Hartosh could continue their conversation, Campos approached him. I heard a lot of talk about ISPA. Are the Marines here or not? They are, though only two. I don't think you have to guess what happened to the others, Hartosh reported. Whoa, Jacquard interjected. You speak ISPA? I didn't know any Dakar did. I mean, other than that one scientist guy. Tenchok stepped forward by the medic's side. Oh, right. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Now we really have a chance of getting out of this with our lives. It's been hard, First Scout. We've been attacked and harassed every day since the initial attack. Now with several times the amount of ISPA, actually being able to communicate and your leadership, we can hold out until the rest of the army reaches us. Or better yet, we can break out ourselves. Jacquard was almost too giddy as he talked. He said as though he thought the gods themselves had placed Hartosh and Campus's squad there to find and save the ragtag group of survivors. In truth, Hartosh hoped that's what the gods had planned for them.